We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. This is Robert Phoenix, broadcasting to you live from very temperate Austin, Texas. The weather here for the last week has been almost fall-like and rarely getting above the 80s. Very unusual, a meteorological anomaly for this time of year. So I'm happy to be a part of it right here and now. So today we're going to have a little bit of a different twist or an angle or vector to the show. A lot of times I like to bring on people that are inspirational. They're poets, they're writers, they're musicians, and it takes us a little bit outside of the slightly conspiratorial or the darker zones that we travel in sometimes on the Friday FARcast. So it's always good to achieve a balance of light and dark, the yin and the yang, that we can sort of plunge into here, keep ourselves sane and aligned during very tricky times. So we're going to bring on David Christopher here in just a moment. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. He is the author of The Holy Universe, and it is a classic sort of Platonic dialogue about the state of the planet, the universe, creation, mystery, magic, cosmology, all rolled into one. It's a book that takes place within the framework of the sage and the seeker. And through this dialogue, there is mystery and poetry and gnosis revealed to all of us. And it's gotten some amazing reviews. John Perkins, who we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago on the show, he's the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He says, insightful and thought-provoking, connects the dots between challenges faced by ancient cultures and those confronting us today in ways that inspire us all to take action. And this book, by the way, is a 2014 Nautilus Book Award winner. So this is something that's been taken into some deep consideration and has some real accolades from people who appreciate this type of literature and this type of spiritual exploration. So let's bring him on. Let's bring David Christopher on. Let's get into this and talk about the Holy Universe. Hi, David.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you for being on. I know you're real busy and have a lot of interviews and other things you've got going on here with the book, so I really appreciate your time. So I wanted to just kind of jump into this and ask you about You wear a couple different hats. You kind of delve in real estate a little bit, and maybe that's a family business that you've got going on the side. You're also an author and obviously a seeker, and you're putting sort of all these together like many of us, during these times, trying to do a number of different things to keep our physical and spiritual bodies afloat. So I wanted to kind of ask you, where you began to become more interested in the spiritual evolutionary work and the cosmological work? How did that happen for you? When did that take place?
Well, about 15, 20 years ago, I saw a mathematical cosmologist by the name of Brian Swimme speak. And he was telling a new story, a new scientific story of our story of creation that really fills the void left by that old mechanistic story of a meaningless universe, or as the sage says in the book, the big dumb rock story. And obviously that also transcends the old literal interpretation of the scriptures. And it really is, when I saw him speak, I just absolutely fell in love with his work, because as with most people in the modern mind, there's a dearth of a sense of spirituality, which is a sense of connection with creation, because we've been fed the story that there really is no meaning behind the universe. This is the old mechanistic story of science. But the new story that Brian was telling and other people, such as Thomas Berry, Sister Miriam McGillis out in Genesis Farm in New Jersey, they were telling the story of a mysteriously creative universe, a universe that behaves as if it's intelligent, behaves as if it's conscious. And I just loved this story and just fell in love with it. So that was really the whole beginning of my journey in this new story.
It's interesting because when you get into that territory, people. One of the great religious debates is, can we know God? Is God a personal God, right? Mm-hmm. Or is God this omniscient, transpersonal, sort of upper level management entity? So when you get into this whole notion that the universe is intelligent and even perhaps even intimate, it brings home this association that yes, we can theoretically know God on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. Well, this story, and it's really something that I'm learning myself too. I'm as much of a seeker as anyone. And this story actually goes beyond it. There's actually a point in the book where the sage talks with the seeker about this, and where they've been talking about this whole idea of this universe as behaving as if it knew what it was doing. And what the sage says around is there a God or not is that, for me, the images of egoic beings conjured by the word God or creator are small, shadowy echoes that do not even begin to illuminate the grandeur of the infinite. Mm. The word infinite, or even better, the phrase, the creative force of the infinite, better captures the incomprehensible depth and complexity of the processes that drive the creation of the galaxies, stars, planets, Earth, and us. So it's this phrase, the creative force of the infinite, that actually brings us back into this whole creative process. We're not some entity that was kind of put on a stage. God makes this stage called Earth, and then we are put on it. We actually emerged out of that same creative process. And in a way, the sages of the East very much were onto that we are part of this. We are part of the universe, or as Brian Swimme says, we are the universe manifest in the form of a human being. So it really is a new way. You kind of have to get your footing for a while, saying it's beyond both the idea of a transcendent God or a personal God. It's even more intimate than that. We are part of the process, and we belong here. And that's very much part of the new story, is that we belong here. We're not fallen. We're not flawed. We're not some odd alien presence. We're part of this apparent vast, intelligent, creative force. Mm-hmm. And even science now agrees with what we've intuitively known all along.
Yeah, that's good. That's good news. When people when people start to work on works like this, there's a process that takes place, and it's a unique process, and it's unique to everyone who is engaging with it. And I'm always interested in what occurs during the creation of a book like this, and how a person's life changes, and what kind of synchronicities occur, and how it becomes more than just you sitting down at a keyboard. I'm sure you've got a few stories around those sorts of things.
Well, one thing, part of the reason why I was laughing is that I have a teacher myself that I've been working with for the past 5 years, and a book can be all-consuming, especially when you love it as much as I really love this whole process. It really, the message of the book is so deeply important to me, and that we belong here, but also that there are consequences, and we have physical consequences to the planet, in terms of social justice and in terms of the ecology of the planet that we're beginning to feel the effects of. So part of the process of writing the book was really, he at one point said, the book is really almost besides the point. It's really, how are you in the universe? How are you on Earth now? How are your relationships? And how are you not going to get over-consumed by this? This is going to be your spiritual challenge. Mm-hmm. And in writing the book, it came out of one of John Perkins' organizations that he helped to found was called the Pachamama Alliance in San Francisco. It's a rainforest NGO in San Francisco. And part of their work in the North is to help people change the worldview of modern mind. And that work, there's a symposium they have called Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream. And it was that symposium that was really got me going in writing this book. It was that inspiration of the content of it, that included that new story. And I really wanted to see it in a more poetic form, though. The science was beautiful, but it only spoke to my mind, and I really wanted to see it in a poetic form. So as I was writing it, and I really didn't know that I was a writer, kind of was a surprise to me, but there were times where I would set the pencil down and think, where in the world did this come from? For me to say that I wrote this book is kind of an odd thing to say, because it feels like it came from some other person almost, almost like a muse or something like that. I would look around and say, okay, where are you? So that was very much part of my process, and it was also work. There were just times when, okay, now we really need to clean this up and make the words fit even better, and make the content and the story of the seeker and the sage flow as they tell the story within the story. Yeah,
absolutely. Before we got on the air today, we talked a little bit about you being from Northern California and my formerly being in Northern California. Mm-hmm. And it's such an interesting incubation space. It's almost unlike any other place in the world. I mean, you have the Pachamama Alliance, you have Matthew Fox in the East Bay, you have a number of, I think Brian Swim might even be from Santa Cruz, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and he's at CI, the California Institute for Integral Studies in San Francisco. That's where he teaches.
So you've got CIS, and you have JFK University. So it's this amazing kind of cyclotron of ideas and percolation. How much did the geography of living in Northern California and obviously being influenced by these people to some extent, how much did that play a role in your development in the book as well?
Well, certainly it was enormous. I was trained to be a facilitator at Pachamama Alliance to teach the Awakening the Dreamer program, and obviously living right close by was wonderful to have that, be an easy option for me. Mm-hmm. And there was so much work done, not quite for me, but there was a lot of work in that symposium that helped guide me to the sources that I used in order to create the book. So, and it's just very much in the air here that there seems to be a new, almost a new acceptance of spirituality in activist groups. And also, along with that, a new acceptance of the reality of the need for activism within spiritual groups. There's been this, way back when in the 70s and 80s when the whole idea of New Age started out, it was very much a personal change focus. It was very much focused on my spirit and my needs, which is important work to do. And now I have this feeling that, in some of the folks I've been talking with here and elsewhere, there's this feeling of it's time to transcend that. It's time to not awaken and disengage with the world, but it's more like having this spiritual awakening and then creating an appropriate engagement with the world. And it's nice to be in this neighborhood where this is a very much an easily accepted idea that there are a lot of people who are of that idea, of that mind.
It's an interesting dynamic because I spent most of my life in Northern California, and I'm very really familiar with Pachamama. I have really good friends that are a part of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I grew up and basically was nurtured in that scene, in that bubble, and there are certain values that are intrinsic to being a part of that scene in that bubble, which are more feminine. It's more about the kind of the sacred mystery and love, and then you get some of these sort of kind of, I don't know, tributaries like polyamory, and there's other stuff that comes into play. So some of the issues and some of the values that are associated with that area are fairly specific in some ways. And then I moved to Texas, and there's some of that here in Austin, but in Texas it's more about sort of the individual's rights and the individual's ability to be sovereign or to have control or more say in their day-to-day life and their well-being. And it almost feels like there are these two sort of hemispheres of here we have the needs for the collective at a sacred level that need to be tended to, and on the other hand you have the individual need, which also needs to be fostered and also needs to be honored. And I think that for me, and maybe you cover this in the book, or maybe you've engaged with this in your own life, that these are two sort of separate hemispheres that in some ways have to come together, that we have to honor the individual and our rights and our own ability to make choices without a lot of outside interference, but at the same time have a greater awareness and responsibility for the planet and for other people. I think this is really where the rubber hits the road in our work, at least for me. And does that come up for you at all?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, it's moving beyond individual rights. It's also a need to look at individual responsibilities that come with those rights. That certainly is vital. But there's also, it's not just about individual values and family values. We've lost that connection with community values. And unfortunately, a lot of our infrastructure really doesn't encourage that, especially in our living spaces that have been built since the automobile became so prevalent. In the older part of their cities that grew up beforehand, and you can see this in the older cities in the United States, they're much more livable, they're much more walkable, and they're much more have a much better place or a much better chance of having a vibrant neighborhood. And it's harder to do that in a suburb, simply because it really, just imagine going into a brand new suburb in a lot of places in California anyway. It just the whole context of the development screams go indoors. And if you imagine someone sitting on a lawn chair on the front lawn of one of these houses, you just kind of think, wait a minute, that just feels odd. You're not supposed to be on your front lawn.
Right.
So, yeah, there is this whole notion of community values and community connection that people obviously want and need. That's what we evolved into. We evolved as very social creatures, and we need that community in order to be full human beings. So, it's certainly my hope that we don't trample on individual rights, but we also pay more mind to our collective rights and collective responsibilities. And that's it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be work. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of conversation and work, and sometimes conflict too. But I think it's very necessary work.
Yeah.
And this is all part of, as the way in this particular book, the sage character calls it the great transformation, what we're being forced to go through now because of the crises of a lot of, in part what we were just talking about is a crisis of spirit and crisis of meaning of what are we here for? Are we really just consumers who our job is, when you listen to the news, our job is to go out and buy stuff so the economy can be strong? Well, that's one facet of being human, but is that it? and there's more. So we have a spiritual crisis, we have a social justice crisis, and equity crisis, and we have the ecological crises. All three of those are part of, really the worldview underneath all three of those is this worldview of modern mind, which says we are separate and not connected. And that's the worldview that I think we would do well to examine and change.
Yeah, and that sounds like it would be a really good start.
Yeah.
We talked about you reading some excerpts live here, and I think you probably have a few of those dog-eared. Do you want to start into that and
let me
some of the books?
Certainly. Let me. This particular piece. It's about 2 minutes long or so, and it's towards the beginning of the book. And just to give you some context, the seeker and the sage have begun to meet, and the sage says, you know what? I think part of your problem is that you don't have that larger story. You never replaced that story that you walked away from when you were a kid with anything that really is deeply meaningful beyond this whole mechanistic big dumb rock story. So why don't we start with the biggest story, the story of the creation of the universe, and we'll bring it all the way to present day, and then we'll tell that story, and then we'll look at how does this apply to your life. So the sage starts from the very beginning of the creation of the universe, and this particular piece is called The Infinite and the Creation of the Cosmos. It was the beginning of all beginnings. It was a time of no time, for time did not exist. A place of no place, for space did not exist. It was a beginning like no other, for there was no before. There was no time, there was no place, there was only the infinite and the unfathomable mystery. And the unfathomable mystery was all that was to be. And all that was to be was small, smaller than the tiniest particle in the tiniest atom, in the tiniest dream, although there was nowhere from which to see how small all that was to be was, for there was no outside and no inside, no here, no there, no now, no then, no darkness, and no light. There was nothing save a whisper of what might be, an infinitesimal, indescribable, unfathomable mystery. And out of the unfathomable mystery, the infinite called forth to itself. It called forth space. It called forth time. It called forth being. And in that ecstatic instant, the universe exclaimed, exploding outward into existence with a jubilant and breathtaking beauty, brightness, energy, violence, power, and glory of a trillion newborn stars. It was a perfect explosion. 1 trillionth of a second slower and the universe would collapse back into itself, unfulfilled. 1 trillionth of a second faster, and the universe would spin out, dissipating into nothingness, never to create galaxies, stars, planets, life, nor us. A perfect explosion. And in the instance of this perfect explosion, the infinite began a brilliant and fierce cycle of gloriously creating, violently destroying, and gloriously creating once more, as if it knew what it was doing. So that is the beginning of the creation story that the sage offers. And the rest, by the way, of this particular chapter, I do have it posted on my website if people want to take a look at it and look at the next section talks about the 7 creations of the galaxies and stars and so on. So that's kind of the feel of the story that the sage tells of the creation story. I really wanted it to be something like it's scientifically, it's accurate scientifically, and I really wanted it told in a story that was really reminiscent of the scriptures.
Mm-hmm. Did you grow up with a religious upbringing?
I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and so my introduction was from that that Protestant upbringing with the King James Bible too, and even though I left that literal interpretation of the Bible a long ago, when I was a teenager, there was a part of me that really loved the sound of the King James Bible. Mm-hmm. some of the stuff in there is a little crazy making in what it asserts, but it's just told in a really beautiful way. And so that was one of the models I had in my mind as this story was coming forth, is remembering some of those little turns of phrases of the scriptures and also the liturgy of the Episcopal Church.
Mm-hmm. Where did you get the chutzpah or the courage to sit down and say, I'm going to write this thing? Where did that come from?
Well, there were, as I was saying before, when I was teaching the Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream Symposium, and part of this symposium, as I said, talks about this news story, but they also, the people who were talking about it, saying we need a new narrative, we need a new telling of the scientific story, we need a new story, and I became frustrated in saying, well, why don't we just write it? Why don't we just do this? And I was lamenting this to one of my, an acquaintance of mine, Dwayne Elgin, who for a while was actually a neighbor of mine, and I was lamenting to him. He's one of these authors who is part of creating this news, in part of this whole process of creating this new story in its different guises. And Dwayne just turned to me and says, "Well, why don't you write it? I mean, you know this stuff as well as anyone. Why don't you write this story? You know this as well as anyone, and I'll help you." And he did. He actually started me on the process of writing the book. So the very early manuscripts were shepherded by him. So that's kind of where the chutzpah came. I actually did question myself very early on, like, who do you think you are that you can rewrite essentially you're mucking around with Genesis here. And,
right.
Who are you to be rewriting the Bible? And yet, why not? And it's actually been pretty well received. In some circles it hasn't. It has been called heretical, so perhaps that means I'm on the right path. I don't know.
Right. One would think so.
Yeah.
One of the things that the New Age movement, or let's reframe it, the spiritual evolutionary movement, gets panned with or hit with, is that it is also in some ways a semi-elitist movement. Mm-hmm. That the concepts, that everything from the concepts to the fashion to what you eat to even your thoughts at times are filtered and rarefied and don't have a lot of context or contact or meaning with people that are outside of that world or outside of that bubble. And we are really embracing this universal cosmology that it touches theoretically everyone, and everyone even outside of that bubble or that sphere. What would you say about your work as it relates to, quote unquote, the average person or the common man, or somebody who may not necessarily be familiar with the mythology, the emerging mythology, but somehow wants to remain connected to something bigger than themselves and a greater sense of faith? Where is the intersection between these two worlds, David, for you?
The intersection between the scientific and the spiritual, or the New
Not
Age?
Really. Not really. It's more about, I think, in some ways, a certain type of community, and outside of that community, so that there's not an us versus them sort of dynamic involved. Where can your work and work that is similar in some ways, coming out of that sort of Bay Area cosmogenesis, how can that matter and be meaningful for people outside of that world? Or does it even matter at all?
Well, I think I hope it does matter, because what this does is that this new story, and my story is simply one version of it too. I certainly don't think it's the final word. That's just the reality of science, is that we're learning more as we go on. And so this particular story really reconnects us to the universe in a very fundamental way. We belong here. We're part of this process, and it's an evolutionary process that embraces a mysteriousness to it. I'm very clear that I do not have all the answers. In fact, my feeling is that anyone who claims to have answers is someone like, you really want to be a little leery of someone who claims that this is the answer. And this is more of an invitation, and this is more of, we scientifically, this says we all came from the very same exact point. All of creation, all the galaxies, everything on the planet, all of us together started from the one single singularity of the Big Bang, which is that the excerpt I just read. That's what it was talking about, was that flashing forth of the universe. And so I really wanted to couch it outside of what has been, what people sometimes call, New Age language. I really want to use a more traditional poetic language so that it might be more inviting to folks. So it also helps give a context for what we face on the planet now with this triune crisis we're facing, the crisis of meaning, the crisis of social equity, and the crisis of the ecology that we're facing. And it also it gives us a framework for that in that, the universe actually does go into dysfunction sometimes. And evolution does proceed through dysfunction. So, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when the web of life goes into dysfunction, yes, things can happen, species can go into extinction, and things can go into turmoil. But out of that, there's also the possibility for amazing evolution. What springs to mind as I'm talking is what happened 65 million years ago with the KT impact of the asteroid hitting Earth and causing the extinction of dinosaurs. And without that catastrophe, mammals would not have arisen to the point where human beings could emerge. And we are amazing creatures. We are astonishingly intelligent, astonishingly inventive. I mean, we're very, very successful. So that kind of gives you a flavor of what I'm hoping people will take from this book, that we really do belong here, but our individual and collective actions also have consequences. And this current story of ours, the story of separation, is a destructive one. And if we really want to change it, we do have to create a new story of connection. If our civilizations, perhaps even our species, are to survive. So this really gives us a framework. I mean, the part of the framework in the book, it talks about ancient mind, which arose maybe 50 to 100,000 years ago, or indigenous mind, and then countered with modern mind, the ancient mind having a story of connection, modern mind having the story of separation, which really, it started out about 10,000 years ago with the invention of systemic agriculture, and really got going with the scientific revolution a few centuries ago. And that story of separation has created amazing and brilliant things. I mean, I would not be alive without the technology of modern mind, literally. And yet, it's now time for a new planetary mind, which reconnects us, brings back that old story of connection. So those are just some thoughts around, how is this relevant to the everyday person?
Do you have another section, maybe along these lines, that you'd like to delve into and read, perhaps, or any other thing that pops?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one that springs to mind. I was just speaking about it, and this is in the chapter called "The Emergence of the Web of Life," and it talks about what happens when catastrophes do happen. And we as life, about 3 billion years ago, ran into a catastrophe or ran into a famine where there wasn't much left of Earth's crust to eat anymore. And we invented photosynthesis. And I say we, by the way, very deliberately, to include us into that connection of we as life were creative. And how intelligent and aware we are, that's always a philosophical debate. But we as life created photosynthesis to create new sources of energy and food. And yet, and I'll start here, yet once again, catastrophe. For as the beings who seized starlight to strip apart water and air became stronger and multiplied, they gave off oxygen, a vile and poisonous fire that slowly spread and turned the color of the sky an ominous, deadly blue. For this oxygen, this poison, destroyed the wastes of one that might have been food for others, rendered inedible the flesh of earth, even penetrated the beings and killed them. Oxygen wrought havoc across earth. It destroyed swarms of the tiny beings, their food, and their colonies of life. So when life basically created a new way of living that then in turn created another catastrophe, which James Lovelock, the scientist who came up with the Gaia theory, said that the oxygen catastrophe nearly wiped life off of Earth. It was that bad. And life didn't know what to do with oxygen. And yet we found a way. We found a way to use oxygen to our advantage and become even stronger, like 20 times stronger than previous ancestors in the microbial world. And then we started attacking one another. Those new beings started going on the hunt. And I'll continue with this particular piece. Yet there were new lessons to learn. For it came to pass that two of these tiny beings together brought something most startling and predictable. The first, a violent being of fire armed with the power of oxygen and hungering for food, attacked the second being, penetrating its flesh and intent on destroying it. Yet this second being did not die. It remained alive, harboring and feeding the first within itself. The first, the would-be predator, set aside its violent ways and in turn helped the second being, protecting it from the fire of oxygen, even using oxygen to feed them both. Thus the two beings joined together as one, using oxygen, the waste of another, as sustenance for itself. And this new being's waste, carbon dioxide, became in turn sustenance for others. Catastrophe begat creativity. Competition begat cooperation. The curse of oxygen became a blessing. All the tiny beings once again prospered and multiplied, filling the oceans of earth, and the blue of the sky transformed from the color of death into the color of life. And I think this is a really good metaphor for what we're facing now, because we as life, as human beings, have created pretty enormous catastrophe or catastrophic conditions and crises.
Right.
And yet it may be that, just as it did 3 billion years or so ago, we created catastrophic conditions that we then created for what this description was of, which was the eukaryotic complex cell. And without that catastrophe, we would not have had complex cells, plants, animals, and eventually human beings. Mm-hmm. So it's quite possible that's what we're facing now.
Interesting. One of the things that we cover fairly often in this program is the invasive nature of destructive technologies, and I'm specifically referring to genetically modified organisms in food, and most, if not all, vaccines, and then of course we have the electronic smog of ELFs and EMFs and microwaves, and any number of things that are contributing to the collapse of nature, the collapse of colonies in the bee world. And it seems to me that based on the work that I've done in concert and conversation with others, that the placebo for all of this is more technology. That we'll have technology, we'll have nanofied systems inside of us that will be taking care of everything that we have screwed up. And it's like this doubling down effect that is really kind of in the works in some ways. And then we see somebody like Ray Kurzweil, who has invested heavily in robotics through Google, and we see this emergence of a different kind of cosmology happening right before our very eyes. The virtual cosmology, which is in some ways maybe even in competition with the organic and the carbonic cosmology that we've been basically sort of stewarding over and dominating on this planet for the amount of time that your book spans. So this is an interesting kind of sort of wrinkle to our story. What are your thoughts around this? And because you use the word singularity from the singularity of the point of creation, but now we theoretically, based on Kurzweil's work, are approaching a singularity on a digital or virtual level, but I also think there's a deeper kind of spiritual significance to that he doesn't really talk about. What's your thoughts around this, and how does this kind of relate to the ongoing chapter, the ongoing story within the story that you're talking about?
Oh yeah, it's a huge part of it. There's a section in the chapter called Stories of Modern Mind that deals with technology, and that section is called Reverent Technology. What that particular section talks about is, and this is also within the dialogue format between the seeker and the sage, and they talk about, what technology is the great magnifier and technology is the great separator. Technology magnifies our power on Earth, and it magnifies our power in the cosmos. We can see so much and learn so much. We can peer into the very large and down into the very small and learn so much. And that magnification of our power comes with consequences, especially if we have a worldview that says we can do whatever we want to Earth without consequence. And if there are consequences, don't worry, science will fix it.
Right.
That is really part of the old story of modern mind, that we are separate and we can do to it with whatever we wish, without any kind of sense of, well, wait a minute, if you pluck one string of a web, it's going to reverberate through the entire web. And it really requires a much greater sense of reverence. At one point in the dialogues, the sage says that's part of the challenge of this great transformation, to develop a sense of sacredness that informs our use of technology, which then helps us to change the way we set things up, so that everyone afflicted by any technology can ask important questions as we consider using it. At this point, the way a technology is brought into our world is that, will it make money? That really is the bottom line. There is no discussion of, and what needs to happen is a discussion of what are the underlying stories that drive this desire to use this technology? How harmonious are these stories with the web of life? What will the social, political, and cultural consequences might be of this technology? Who does it serve? How equitably will it be shared? And these are questions that just simply don't enter. And part of the hopeful thing for me is that one of the programs of Pachamama Alliance is encouraging the move to amend movement to create a new amendment to the Constitution of the United States that begins to curtail the power of corporations and not recognize them as people, as entities having rights.
Right.
That is part of the worldview that's underlying this drive toward technology, away from the sacred sense and towards the more gee whiz, oh, don't worry, technology will take care of everything. I highly doubt it will. It's sort of like that's the same consciousness, as Einstein says. It's the same consciousness that caused the problem in the first place. Yeah. If anything, it'll just cause more trouble. So I very much am leery of any kind of technology that is just simply introduced for its own sake. And the conundrum is that we're all very much, we can very easily get attached to the technology too. I mean, I have a computer, I have a smartphone. Right. And they do extend my power, but my prayer is that my blessing would be is that we begin to wake up to a more reverent sense of technology. Mm-hmm. The sage at one point even says, one doesn't have to believe in any sort of supernatural essence to offer gratitude to this amazing, mysterious process of creation. And this process evokes awe, wonder, and even gratitude only if you begin to contemplate it, only if you stop and long enough to contemplate it. And that is more of an attitude that I hope we begin to approach everything in our life, not including technology, right? With that sense of sacredness and humility too, because we don't know when we muck around with genetics, or when we introduce nanotechnology, or even if we do, just regular, the everyday technology we're familiar with. We don't know how it echoes, and we would do well to have a strong dose of humility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. It also feels to me like science and atheism go hand in hand, or science and secular humanism go hand in hand. The secular humanism being the enlightened form of atheism. And so therefore the human is the ultimate sort of arbiter of choice. There is no God, there is no consequence. There's always science, which can help us solve the problems that science has created, theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about the Bay Area that I always loved was that there was sort of this interdisciplinary approach to a lot of things. There was this fusion of worlds going on. And it would really be helpful if scientists, like somebody like Newton was very well schooled in religion and the Bible. I mean, he knew that he understood kind of where things were on a spiritual level in many ways. Mm-hmm. But he was also obviously a scientist, somebody who was exploring the mind and matter and nature. It would seem that more of an interdisciplinary approach where people are engaged in science to sort of balance out their development would be a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And science, having the idea of science and atheism going hand in hand, that it is unfortunate because it is who was it? I believe Edward Abbey. I remember him coming up with the term scientism, which is the belief, the faith that everything can be understood through the scientific paradigm. And really that there are no other ways to really get at truth and understanding of the universe except through the scientific method. Mm-hmm. And that is an article of faith. It is a belief. And it's interesting to hear, I once heard someone talking on NPR's station at one point where they were arguing back and forth. And the one person talking about his beliefs that this is one way we should be on the earth in one way. I don't remember exactly what it was. And the other person responded, he says, well, the key thing to his phrase is belief. See, I'm an empiricist, and I trust the numbers. And the interesting thing is one of those moments where you want to yell at the radio and saying, oh, and you didn't finish the sentence. You didn't finish the sentence saying, I am an empiricist. I believe that numbers are the only way, because there's no empirical evidence that you can point to that say science will always be able, empiricism will always be able to explain the universe. That in of itself is an unscientific statement. It is a statement of belief. And that needs to be recognized, that we all need to have a strong dose of humility and wonder and awe, I think, in order to really help ourselves make our way through these times ahead. Certainty is a very deadly thing. People who are certain can be very dangerous. And the problem is we love it. We like certainty. We want to know what's going to happen, especially in stressful times. So it's kind of a paradox that we're running into, and we'll have to work through as we make our way.
I agree. How did the seeker and the sage meet?
The seeker and the sage met, let's see, the seeker's wife actually said, the seeker basically loses his job and starts, but not only that, recognizes that I just don't like my life anymore. I don't like my career. I don't understand why I'm here. And the seeker's wife at a certain point says, I think you really I think you should talk with this person. So it's a seeker's wife essentially who says, go meet with this sage person and just let's see what happens. You just had a gut feel that this might be a good person for you to work with. So that's essentially how they meet.
Mm-hmm. And there's a kind of an interesting sort of twist that occurs during this dialogue, right?
Yes, at the beginning of the dialogues, and some of your listeners, as I wouldn't imagine that some of them started forming images in their mind of who the seeker and the sage were. Just what do they look like? And on page 15 in the book, it's the first time he used the personal pronoun she for the sage. Mm-hmm. And nearly all of my early readers of manuscripts all stopped at that point and circled that letter and circled that word and said, "Oh, I didn't realize that the sage was a woman." And this is, I feel, as I talk more and more and learn more and more, I'm realizing that this is a very important point. That even, I was talking with one group where there was a woman there who was just turned 80 years old, and she scowled at me as we talked about this particular nuance. And when I read out of the book, I was very careful to not identify the sage as either a man or a woman. And when we had that conversation, when I did read a piece where I said she, you can sometimes see the crowd just kind of ripple going, oh, wait a minute, as they kind of reset their image of, oh, the sage is a woman. I didn't realize that. And she scowled at me and said, I've been a feminist for 70 years, and I'll be damned if I didn't see two white guys. This is important because it really shows that old worldview, the patriarchal worldview, that story of separation, which really came out of a patriarchal separate story of separation for 10,000 years, is still very deep within us. And it's important to me that we figure out how the feminine can come back, not to take over, but to re-emerge as a very important part of how we do things and how things are set up. Mm-hmm. We don't want to let go of everything, the masculine side, but we certainly we certainly can't continue to put down the feminine side. And the sage became a metaphor because it's revealed later on in the book that not only is she female, she's also a woman of color. She actually has heritage from all 6 continents. Mm-hmm. And she became the metaphor for all those people and all those worldviews that we have this tendency to put down. And the reason why I think this is such a vital point is that the same worldview that sees throwaway people, that sees throwaway ethnicities, sees throwaway genders, is the same worldview that sees a throwaway environment. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're related, it's the same worldview. And this is an enormous part of our work, is to begin to heal those divides and at least talk about those divides, even if they can't be healed, but to really bring them forward and acknowledge them as we start to come together. I think there's a lot of power once we get out of our little activist silos of what I'm really interested in, realize that we're all working on the same thing. And mm-hmm. we have a lot of power as we join together.
Well, it's interesting that a feminist would come up with that definition and that picture in her mind, and that really speaks to us dropping our isms, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so even for her, it was like it seems that she was so kind of inculcated into her own worldview, no matter how well that has been working for her or not on some level, that needed to be challenged as well. Oh, yes.
Very much so, yeah. And that's part of the reason why I did it is, I'm a bit of a mischievous person, so I kind of like rattling cages. But it also was to really bring it home to everyone how deeply ingrained it is, that idea that only men can be sages. That she really, without that hit, without that gut experience of, oh my God, I saw 2 white men, as in this conversation, to remind her that I still have a lot of work to do. I still have that deeply. It's important that we recognize that, we're never going to get rid of our prejudices and whatnot, but we can at least recognize how deeply they are embedded and try to remain aware of them, and remain aware of the privilege that comes with folks who are white, with folks who are heterosexual, and folks who are male. We're on, those of us who identify that way are on top of a privilege pile that we don't have to think about how it is to be otherwise in the world, and how everyone has those prejudices and those conceived notions that put down those people, even those who identify other than white, male, heterosexual. That's still inculcated in their psyche. So that's an important part of the work. It's a very important part of the work.
Yeah, and even that is changing in kind of a big way. What is
yes?
What's next for you? I know you've probably got more interviews and tours, but what's next for you creatively, David?
Well, the one thing I would really love to create is an online, not necessarily a course, although that may come down the road. But I wanted to create an online forum for folks who have read or who are interested in reading or who at least are interested in this new story to come together and just simply talk with one another. One of the most common things that people who are looking at creating a new world and creating this new worldview is that they feel very alone. It's kind of like you were mentioning earlier, moving to Austin and being in Texas, that it doesn't feel like the Bay Area. It doesn't feel like there are many people out there. But the reality is there are. And I really hope to help connect those folks. Even in places, there's a stereotype that nobody in the Midwest or in the breadbasket or, in Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa, nobody there, they're all of one mind, and that's not true. There are people who are interested in this planetary mind everywhere. So what I'm hoping to do every 6 weeks or so is to have this online forum for people to gather and talk about certain aspects of the book. And that's going to be, I'm hoping to roll that out either in July or August. So that information will be on the website.
Great.
And I do hope to there's one little piece in there called The Smallest Vessel that I would love to see that particular piece turned into a children's book. And it really goes through this whole, it's like a 5-minute read of how we really all belong in this universe. We think we're small, but we're not, because if the universe were any smaller than it is, it couldn't hold us. We would be too big. So it really flips that whole idea of, we're just small, insignificant nothings. It's no. We are so big that the universe had to be an infinitely large universe in order to contain us. If we're any smaller, we couldn't be here, which I think is an amazing point of view. So that's a little bit of what next. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea and puts things really into perspective and amplifies really our not self-importance but importance in the story in general. So.
Yes, exactly, and that's important. It doesn't, it doesn't say, we're the greatest thing in the universe. It says that we're part of this family. It's not it's not to swing us to the other side of the pendulum, certainly.
Yeah, good stuff, David. Well, I really appreciate you coming on here and spending time with us this last hour. And people can find out about you and about the book. The website is theholyuniverse.com. And if you look for Christopher,
just so people know, it is spelled Holy.
Right, exactly. And if you do look for David Christopher, you'll have to navigate through kind of an actor and a few other people until you find David. So try to find the Holy Universe and theholyuniverse.com. That's the best way to get there and find out what he's doing and get into the book, which is actually a pretty wonderful piece here and part of our ongoing story of our collective and individual experience. So thanks again for coming on, David, and maybe we'll meet each other again somewhere down the line.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
So that's author, cosmologist David Christopher. And the great thing about having somebody like David on the show is that it speaks to the fact that he was somebody who spent a lot of time taking in a lot of different information and at a deep level and decided to do something with it. He decided to write a book, which is probably kind of a synthesis and encapsulation of a lot of the things that he'd been taking in and thinking about and learning. And so this book has become kind of, his reinterpretation or his creative experience about those ideas and why they're important and how they've changed his life. Anybody can do it. Anybody can sit down and have a creative expression and a creative manifestation of who they are based on what they love. And that's why I bring people like David on the show, because they show us that we can do it. I think this is his first book. This is his first book. And it's gotten critical acclaim. It's gotten the praise and acceptance of some really interesting and profound thinkers in our society. So let this inspire you in your own way to have your own relationship with creation and tell your own version, your own narrative of your own creation story, whether it's music or art or writing or a website, or maybe it's a spiritual or healing art. We live in a time where things are pretty dark. There are things outside of us that if we pay attention to them are daunting. And in a lot of ways, the message is to give up, right? That's the message, just give up. There's no way that you can win against such daunting odds, such great technologies, such powerful minds that map out our future 5, 6, 7, 8 steps ahead of us. Huge amounts of money, influence, power, corporate influence, governmental power. And then we get into the whole world of the esoteric and the occult and the dark magic, which also shapes our reality. It seems as though it can be overwhelming at times. Why? Why continue? Well, you continue because you matter. You continue because you count. You continue because it's important in its own way. You don't know, and you'll never know, how you impact other people's lives and your own life if you give up at any point along the way. And I've talked with many healers and many people in the spiritual realm and people in the sort of the dynamically creative realm, and they're human, and they get bogged down, and they keep going because there's something inside them that says you got to keep going, you got to keep going, you've got to keep moving, you've got to keep manifesting, you've got to keep creating. And it's difficult because we live in a time where it's not always economically feasible to do that. The price of food is going up, the price of gas is going up, the cost of living going up, the price of medicine, the price of care, it's all going up. So it's a squeeze play in order for us to either conform or to stay within our creative impulse. And it can be done. You have to be a little more ingenuitive, a little more creative, but it can be done. That said, this radio show comes to you every week, every Friday, where I bring guests like David. Last week, Carl Johan Kallman. The week before, Sophia Smallstrom, Charles Osmond, Katie Galante. I bring you really, really cutting-edge thinkers and people that give you alternative ways of looking at the world and interacting with the world. And I do this without any form of compensation. So this is an opportunity for me to share with you that if you feel like donating to Free Association Radio, you can go to my website, robertphoenix.com. Right there, top upper left-hand corner, there's a donation button. Click through. Anything you can donate to keep this enterprise afloat. I also do the 11th House Radio on Mondays, 2 hours of astrology, where I teach astrology, where we do live readings. We're getting into other forms of esoterica, i.e. numerology and tarot. So these are 4 hours worth of radio broadcast brought to you each week. And if you can help keep it alive, much appreciation and gratitude on this end. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to play a little bit of music, and I'm going to come back, and who knows where we're going to take the show. I have no idea. Quite often I have no idea unless I have a guest. I'm being really honest with you. That's the way it is. So I have no idea, but when we come back, I guarantee you it will be interesting, whatever that thing is. So let me see here. What do I want to play? I'm going to play a little Man Called Clay. I haven't played his stuff in a long time. I miss Man Called Clay. This is Umek, and this is from his latest CD. And I hope if you're out there, Clay Colgin, I hope you're doing well. And this is for you, Umek. Well, that was a lovely little mid-afternoon sonata eunuch from a man called Clay. So I was scanning around by the way, you're listening to Robert Phoenix, and this is the Friday FARcast. For the next 60 minutes or so, we're just going to get into some news. We're going to break some stuff down. We're going to try to crack open the code for what's happening geopolitically and try to do so in real time. So I just was scanning the various news services, and this is from RT.com. Apparently Germany is getting rid of Verizon, and they are doing so because Verizon is so incredibly cozy with the NSA over the spying scandal, or the NSA's ability to tap into wireless networks with ease, and Verizon, of course, being the most easy or easily accessible of any of the networks. And I'm going to read you the story here. This is from RT.com. It says, citing concerns over the NSA's wiretapping of Chancellor Angela Merkel and other top officials' phones, the German Interior Ministry announced Thursday that it will not renew its contract with Verizon to provide service for government ministries. As part of an effort to revamp the secure communications networks, the country will instead rely on Germany's Deutsche Telekom, Reuters reported. Now, that's a really interesting sentence. They weren't even using their own infrastructure, their own telecommunications infrastructure, Deutsche Telekom. They weren't even using it. They were using Verizon. Very interesting. Since the beginning of the NSA scandal, U.S. businesses have expressed concern over the potential blowback of the revelations on their bottom lines, fearing foreign governments and other firms will no longer trust them provide secure products and services. They push back against the government, demanding more transparency of how the intelligence community operates. Verizon is one of the first companies that can point to the NSA as a direct cause for a failed business deal. The Interior Ministry released a statement Thursday saying the ties revealed between foreign intelligence agencies and firms in the wake of the U.S. National Security Agency affair show that the German government needs a very high level of security for its critical networks. Although it was the first company outed by journalist Glenn Greenwald and British newspaper The Guardian has provided the NSA with millions of instances of metadata on a daily basis, Verizon is not the only or necessarily the first to do so. As far back as 2001, NSA reportedly collected data from AT&T by rerouting information on its network to government computers. Reporting by Wired revealed documents from AT&T technician Mark Klein showing how the feat was accomplished using hardware in a now famous secret room at the company's San Francisco data center. This is a great story, by the way. If you don't know about it, AT&T and the government had created a room at its data center, and they were basically taking everything that was coming in through AT&T, routing it through this room, and then back out the other end. That's how, it's kind of primitive now in terms of technology and packets and packet technology. You can do it anywhere. You don't have to have the physical proximity of having the room. But in 2001, they needed it because of the massive amounts of data that was going in, and they had to collect it in real time. They don't necessarily have to do that now. So it's a famous story. Though the U.S. and Germany are allies, documents released over the past year by whistleblower Edward Snowden. By the way, have you heard that Edward Snowden might be Mark Zuckerberg's nephew or cousin? I think it's his cousin. That's what it is. Revealed an American intelligence community with access to a wide variety of German communications. The fallout has been a chilling of relations between the two nations, with the Bundestag, that's the German parliament, especially fierce in its criticisms and demands for answers from the U.S. To the consternation of American officials hoping to prosecute Snowden for espionage, the German parliament even invited the leaker to testify about the NSA's practices in a formal hearing. Chancellor Merkel, however, has a mixed history with demanding answers from the U.S. At first reacting with outrage and comparing the NSA to the Stasi, the East German secret police, she also demanded the two nations agree to a no spying pact. Well, unfortunately for Miss Merkel, she would also have to include Israel in that no spying pact because they are the people that are collecting most of the data. Her attitude changed markedly, however, after meeting with President Barack Obama in May. Maybe it was Obama's charm. Stressing the need for unity, Merkel attempted to brush the scandal that has outraged German citizens under the rug. This was not received warmly by opposition parties and many of her constituents, a large number of whom view Snowden as a hero. Let's just stop here. There's about 2 more paragraphs. I want to read them, but I want to just kind of stop and look at the chain of events here. So it's revealed that Verizon is collecting all this data from the German government, sending it through to the NSA with, of course, people like Verint in between that are collecting it. Verint, of course, being an Israeli company, and getting buckets of information for the Mossad as well. I mean, let's be clear about that. And so there's outrage. Merkel doesn't like it. And she meets with Obama. And all of a sudden, she does a 180 on this thing. Now, why is that? Now, this is, to me, this is the mystery of Obama, okay? Because publicly, he doesn't seem to have that kind of clout. It's right? Or it's the perfect articulation of teleprompter awareness. It's one of those 2 things. Nice smile, wears a good shirt, boyish charm. Other than that, do we really get a sense that he's the guy that can take Angela Merkel in a meeting and flip her 180 on something in private? Where does that come from? Who really is that is coming through in those meetings? I guarantee you it's not Mr. Teleprompter Awareness Man. It's something else. It's something else. It's someone else. And maybe the someone else and the something else are all in one. Because there is probably a sense of at least fear, at the very least fear, in Merkel to go be a good chancellor. By the way, she's been chancellor for quite a while, hasn't she? Meanwhile, further allegations regarding U.S. surveillance continue to be brought forward, according to a report recently published by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. Süddeutsche Zeitung, I like saying German words. NDR, WDR, the service BND, for at least the NSA has been given large swaths of telecom data by the country's Federal Intelligence Service, the BND. For at least 3 years, raw data was fed directly to the U.S. agency out of Frankfurt. The city is a telecoms hub for much of Europe and beyond. Have you ever been to Frankfurt? I have. That's a cold city, man. I am not talking about the weather. I am talking about the vibration. Frankfurt has a chilly vibe. It is one of the economic centers for Europe and was a major Rothschild outpost and still is. The former Minister of the Interior, Hans-Peter Friedrich, declared last year that if a foreign intel service had been given a tap into the telecoms node in Frankfurt, it would be a violation of Germany's sovereignty. Germany has sovereignty? I didn't know that. So the comments here over on RT are very, very interesting. Let me read one comment. This is from SSD7. It says here, on a wider scale, the implications are that most USA wireless companies are in danger of losing future business around the world. Russia has been developing its own wireless equipment, satellite servers. In fact, Russia is temporarily using old-fashioned typewriters until their own wireless equipment is ready. Nations who don't trust the USA will want to buy Russian cell phones, internet, emails, etc. Interesting. So this contributor, this commenter, basically saying that the Russians are planning their own end around when it comes to providing more stable and secure communications, technology, and hardware. And then here's another comment by Paul von Hamish. Electromagnetic emissions from cellular towers, Wi-Fi mesh networks, military and civilian surveillance, and an overloaded grid are causing massive neurological and behavioral changes in former human beings. Go back and listen to the show that we did here 2 weeks ago with Sophia Smallstrom. We talked exactly about this. We spent an hour getting into how these transmissions and frequencies are changing us. The damage is cumulative and ultimately fatal. Executive staff heading corporations like Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, many others know the cellular phone system is a proven biological hazard. These communication systems are part of the UN Agenda 21 extermination program, and most people like Angela Merkel and other top officials are already brain quite dead. Have a nice, highly secure electromagnetic death. Always nice to have a little bit of positivity come in here. So at least Germany is kind of getting hip to the trip and deciding that they want to go with Deutsche Telekom. Now, there's a war going on in the world, boys and girls. There is a war going on in the world, and it's happening right now. It's happening in the Middle East, and it's happening in Russia, in Ukraine. The United States and Russia are at war. Make no mistake about it. It is a proxy war at this point, but it is a war. Now, Iraq has apparently killed 90 ISIS terrorists. Of course, ISIS being a group fronted and formed by Saudi Arabia, the United States, England, and our good friends in Tel Aviv. It's a completely synthetic group with all kinds of dark magical connotations coming through the word ISIS, of course. Now, Iraq is going to buy Russian jets to fight ISIS. So here we go. Now the battleground has shifted, and it is in Iraq. Again, this is from RT. Russian jets to aid the fight against Sunni rebels in Iraq. PM Maliki. I'll read this. It says here, jets from Russia and Belarus will hopefully make a key difference in the fight against ISIS in Iraq. The country's Prime Minister, Nouri Maliki, said he expressed regrets over Iraq's contract with the U.S., saying their jets are taking too long to arrive. God willing, within 1 week, this force will be effective and will destroy the terrorist dens, he told BBC Arabic. Meanwhile, Maliki criticized the process of purchasing U.S. jets as long-winded, adding that the radicals could have been repelled if Iraq had proper air defense. I'll be frank and say that we were deluded when we signed the contract with the U.S., Maliki said. We should have sought to buy other jet fighters like British, French, and Russian to secure air cover for our forces. If we had air cover, we would have averted what had happened, he went on. Maliki said Iraq bought second-hand jet fighters from Russia and Belarus that should arrive in Iraq in 2 or 3 days. The radical Sunni Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIS or ISIL, has taken large parts of the country's north from the Shia government. During the interview, the Prime Minister also confirmed that Syria was behind Tuesday's airstrikes that targeted Iraqi rebels, adding that he welcomed the move. So now here we go. We have Syria getting involved. There's Syria on the back burner, so Syria gets engaged and is helping Iraq from the back end. They carry out their strikes, and we carry out ours, and the final winners are our two countries, he said. On Tuesday, unidentified bombers launched an airstrike on ISIS positions in the northern Iraqi city of El Qaim. Iraq's own Air Force has also been carrying out attacks on insurgent strongholds over the past week. On Monday, radical Sunni militants regained control over the northern city of Tal Afar and an airport. The earlier jihadists captured 3 new towns and 2 border crossings, one with Jordan and the other with Syria. Those are pretty significant strategic points. The ongoing offensive by ISIS is aimed at achieving total dominance in Iraq by radical Sunni militants. Hundreds of Iraqi soldiers have been killed by insurgents since June 9, when the Sunni militants started their offensive, according to Iraqi forces. The United Nations says more than 1,000 people, mainly civilians, have been killed during the surge thus far. So Maliki was brought into that government by the United States. by the United States. Amazing. So now what is he doing? He's fighting against the United States. This is the ongoing story, the ongoing drama, the ongoing struggle of how we deal with the ever sense of escalating conflicts. Why? Because they make people money. You sell airplanes, you make money. You sell rifles and munitions, you make money. So there's some thought here that one of the reasons why we have these conflicts is because what's happening with the economy is so dire that the only way out of it is to have these ongoing wars, these mini wars taking place. These are the only things that are keeping us floating and solvent. Well, that's based on an old economic model. That's based on the Federal Reserve, fiat lending, economic model, zeros and ones, that we all have to have some kind of philosophical buy-in with. You take that model away and things change. Things change very quickly. So here's another little interesting tidbit. Miss Hillary Clinton's book sales have just absolutely dove down by 44%. So Hard Choices has sold only 48,000 copies since it was published. 48,000 copies in its second week. And it is trending along the same lines as the book by Alan Greenspan, Jim Cramer, and Timothy Geithner. They all have books out, and they're all tanking. So is Hillary's. In fact, it's doing so poorly that it's been discounted by 40% at Amazon. 40%. This is what AP says. So sales for Hillary Rodham Clinton's Hard Choices dropped sharply in its second week of publication, but her memoir remains the country's most popular adult nonfiction book. Maybe they should call it popular adult fiction book, because most of it is lies anyway. According to Nielsen BookScan numbers released Wednesday, Hard Choices sold just over 48,000 copies last week compared to around 85,000 the previous week. Okay, so she sold about 130,000 copies. The figures do not include ebook sales. Publisher Simon & Schuster, which had announced the total first week sales exceeded 100,000 copies, declined Wednesday to offer any numbers on the second week. So sales are far behind the pace of her previous memoir, Living History, which came out in 2003 and sold around 600,000 copies its first week. How would you like to have two memoirs in your life? I'd be happy with one. Anyway, her sales are going in the toilet. Why? Because people know. People know. They understand. She's all used up. All used up. All right? All used up. And they're going to try to put her out there as a viable candidate for the presidency. And it looks like she could probably win. However, I think a dark horse, and a dark horse will come riding in on this next election if, of course, Obama does not become king. All right, you want to know what 8 habits of healthy people are? Enough doom, enough gloom. I'm going to tell you what the 8 habits of healthy people are. But I'm going to play some music first. It's called the T's here in the business, boys and girls. So if you want to know what the 8 habits are to stay healthy, you have to keep listening. Pretty simple. All right, who do I want to play? Who do I want to play? Let's see. How about Sumar by Dwight Loop? It's 6 minutes and 26 seconds, but it's really, really good. why don't you listen to it, enjoy it, have a cup of tea or a smoke. I'll be back after Sumar by my good friend Dwight Loop, my good buddy Dwight Loop, and we're going to get into the 8 habits of happy people. All right, stick around. It could change your life. It would make you a better person. The soothing and healing global fusion sounds of Sumar by Dwight Loop, a.k.a. one of the Tone Pharaohs. So I want to give a big shout out and a thank you to Wildflower, who has heard the call, Wildflower 26. Thank you for hearing the call and donating to the cause. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much. You're listening to Robert Phoenix, and this is the Friday FARcast. I'll send you a little gift there, Wildflower. I'll tell you what. I'll make everybody who's listening a little bit of a deal. All right, here's the deal. If you are listening to this and you want to contribute to this program and this broadcast, and I'm not gonna make any ceiling. It's whatever you can. All right, I will send you a 6-month astrological report detailing what your life is going to be like for the next 6 months. I'll send it to you via PDF. So if you want to donate to this program, I'm going to give you something back. Besides the programming, I'll give you something physical back. So if you're listening to this, whether you're listening to this live, whether you're listening to this on YouTube, whether you're listening to this on the blog talk stream, you donate to the show, robertphoenix.com. You send me your info, I will get in contact with you. You'll get a 6-month report for free. How's that sound? And you can send whatever you want. You don't have to hit a mark with NPR. All right, I got kind of ragged on about these 8 habits. Okay, these 8 habits of happy people. I'm trying to be more positive in my life. So I'm just going to read them. I think everybody kind of knows this stuff already. But this is from the 7 principles of positive psychology that fuel success and performance at work. Spend time outside. That's number 1. 20 minutes a day outside. Studies show you'll not only maintain a better mood, but your mind will be more open and you'll improve your working memory too. Sunshine, even the brightness of a cloudy day, is often brighter than indoor lights and fresh air. Minus the chemtrails, it feels good. Put effort into being happy. That is a choice, man. Sometimes happiness is a choice. I mean, there are days when you don't really feel like being happy, but it's not going to necessarily help you, especially if you engage in the world. And there's a whole notion of faking it until you make it. And I've done it. It's not easy. It is not easy. Sometimes if you're not feeling great, happier music can also apparently get you in a better state of mind. Exercising regularly. I don't exercise enough. I should exercise more. I do, but I don't. But they're right. You get those endorphins happening in a big way. Protecting your health is also very important, apparently, and it's not just what you put into your body, but it's the actual act of protecting your health that apparently also triggers good habits. Caring for other people. This is actually interesting. And I'm going to read this here because I think this is a good one. It says, people who spend time every month helping others, whether that be animals, people, or a space or a place you love, are happier. There's even an immediate effect similar to a high that most people feel directly after doing good, including random acts of goodness. Volunteer work was good for both mental and physical health. People of all ages who volunteered were happier and experienced better physical health and less depression, says Peggy Thoitz, a Vanderbilt University sociologist. Other students have shown that it's not just happy people who are volunteers. Depressed people who do work for others show an elevated mood from the work. Now, a lot of you know that I'm into baseball and I spend time coaching. And when I'm not coaching, I actually spend time with my son's other team and help out with that team. And so that's a form of volunteerism, and it's really great to be around the kids and to do stuff for the kids and to actually help them maintain their own level of positivity and their own level of being able to perform and enjoy what they're doing. I'll share with you a story which was really cool for me. It goes back about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and our team was playing in the tournament, and there was one boy who had a really rough day. And I could see he was having a rough day. He's a good player. He was having a rough day, and I kept pumping him up. How you doing? Don't worry about it. Get back out there. And I was not coaching. I was in the stands. And when he made good plays, I said, hey, well, you're coming back, man. You're bouncing back. And he wound up actually having a good game at the end of that day. We played 4 games that day. His last game was good and was a real bounce-back game for him. He's a good kid. He's a sweet kid. He's got a great smile, mile-wide smile. And without any kind of coercion, I think it might have been the next practice or the practice right after that one, he walked right up to me and he just shook my hand and he smiled at me. And that was one of the, I got to tell you, it was almost like a wild animal coming up to you and, and letting you pet it, Kids don't do that. Kids just don't walk up to you and shake your hand and look you in the eye, right? That was a cool moment. So I can understand why, caring for others can make you happy, because after that experience with him, I felt happier. It's pretty simple. Cultivate strong social relationships, whether you have a few close friends, large and loving family, or strong ties to community. Almost any kind of connection to a social group can improve happiness, according to the Happiness Advantage. Now, what's interesting is that we have a little social group right here. If you go into the chat room, there's a little social group taking place. Show up every Monday, every Friday. They talk about the show. They talk about their personal lives. People have bonded. They've made friends. They've shot emails back and forth. They've sent gifts to one another. That is a really cool thing. It's a small thing. We all have our Facebook pages, and some of them are more communal than others. So, and hopefully you can build strong social relationships in the real world as well. That's important. If you can't, the virtual world, I guess, is a nice substitute, or it's a substitute on some level. I mean, face it, there are people that live in socially isolated areas, and the internet has saved their lives. Saved their lives. So I don't dog online relationships. I don't dog having Facebook friends, or I don't dog having Twitter connections or whatever. I just think it needs to be in balance, and to make sure that you got a few real-time people or real-world people versus virtual world people. Hanging out with happy people. Man, that is really a trip. That is really a trip. It says that this can be hard to do at work, where you don't always choose who you're working with, but you can control the people you spend time with outside your job and who you pass your lunch hour with. This is really important. And it's getting more important as I evolve through my skin, that, especially because in the realm of human design, I am a projector. So I pick up other people's energy. So it's important for me to hang out with positive, supportive, and happy people. It took me almost 50 years of my life to understand this, by the way. So hanging out with happy people is a good thing. And if you're a happy person, guess what? Other people want to hang out with you. That's how it works. It's an amazing concept. So claim your own happiness. Voila. We got a new moon, people. This is a new moon we're at right now. I'm try to write about it. New moon in Cancer. It's a very powerful moon, because we're at the first stages of the sign of Cancer, obviously. But quickly the moon goes from being conjunct the sun, moving towards a conjunction with Jupiter. Now, one of the things that the sign of Cancer can do is that water has memory, right? And Cancer is a water sign. So I believe that water is like software. This is what Emoto and some of these other water people have been sharing with us. You can program good software, or you can program bad software, malware, right? So if we have the new moon in Cancer, we have the sun in Cancer, we have Jupiter in Cancer, it's a way for us to program new emotional connections if we want to, or to program the new emotional connections inside of ourselves. So it's important for you to use this time over the next 48 hours, because water has memory, to really be with your thoughts, to really be with your feelings, and really claim what you want out of your life. And do it with as much love and care as possible, because guess what happens? Cancer, the new moon, the sun, Jupiter, becomes a carrier wave. It becomes a carrier wave that will essentially beam that emotional transmission into all corners of your life. And if we go back to the beginning of the show, and we talk about not only is God a personal God, but it is an essential element and quality of all creation, and it is both personal and transpersonal simultaneously. It is both us and non-us simultaneously, and that we are it and all of those kinds of magical Zen cone conundrum kinds of things. And if that's the case, then creation is co-creating with us as we have these moments. As we have these moments of being able to look inside of our programming and rewriting it, rewriting the script. So this weekend is a good time to do that. Keep that in mind. I think that's about it. I think we've really kind of reached the end of the road here. We started off with David Christopher, and we explored the whole universe, and from there we took a detour into the geopolitical situation of the planet. And of course, we're ending it here with tools that you can stay happy and healthy and positive with. Don't underestimate that, because when you build these interstices of positive networks and people that you love and trust and care for, that's building the immunity of the planet. It is building the psycho-emotional immunity of the planet. And the reason why we are in, at times, such dire straits is because the psycho-emotional immunity of the planet is being attacked. Think of it as a virus. We are under the attack of a psychopathic virus. And those viruses only exist when the body is weak. So strengthen your psycho-emotional immunity with yourself and people around you, and we can fight back this psychopathic virus, which is attempting to disconnect us from everything. All right, that's it. You've reached the end of the show. I want to thank David Christopher, who was a great guest. We'll hopefully have him back on again sometime. And I want to thank everybody who's listened in real time and will be listening after, I guess, in surreal time or post-real time. I want to thank everybody in the chat room as well for showing up. I wouldn't be able to do any of this without your ears, as it were. So that's it. Catch me on Monday, 11th House Radio. We get into astrology. And, of course, robertphoenix.com. We can find a lot of my writing and probably some stuff on this new moon coming up. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Here it is, Philip K. Dick. From 1976, Mets, where I first lived, in this earth suit. I'll see you all Monday. Have a great weekend.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.